And we are live, and this time no hiccups. This is a 2.0 version of us starting. Episode 3, Start, Scale, Grow, the podcast for hiring in the tech space, startup businesses, businesses that are scaling, or businesses that are already established but looking to grow. Here today on a very gloomy Monday afternoon, physically, not metaphorically, with Sam Robb. Sam, lovely to see you, my friend. Thank you for joining.
Hey mate, how's it going?
Very well, thanks. Reason I thought this would be an interesting conversation was you've obviously spent time in 3 early stage fast growth businesses. Cloud Guru back in the day before they were acquired, Mr. Yaman now with Equal. Thought there might be some really interesting discussion points, some really interesting things that you'd have sort of learned in those sort of separate experiences that probably shape how you sort of think about what we do now. So I thought this might be a good conversation. You might be able to share some thoughts, some insights, some advice maybe for people who are either in this space or looking to get into startup hiring and all that sort of thing. And it might just be a fun conversation, probably some good learning there for everybody.
Yeah, cool. Sounds good. If I can help, then all for it.
Perfect, my friend. Let's start off somewhere really simple then. I think one of the things that that a lot of people who've been through sort of early stage fast growth hiring probably battle with is this thing of like understanding the pressures of fast growth hiring. So bodies need to arrive, bums on seats, we need teams filling up. You've probably got pressure from founders in a really early stage or heads of department as you start getting some scale into your teams. So balancing this need to grow quickly, but then the TA/recruiters desire to almost handbrake a little bit because you're wanting to ensure that you've got quality hiring happening rather than just getting any bums on seats. So having sort of been through this 3 times, I was really interested in your perspective on that, sort of how this sort of almost dichotomy, need to move quickly, but you want to be making good quality hires along the way.
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of stuff that contributes to this. But I think if you think about it as like one kind of rule or one guideline that should kind of override kind of, I guess, everything with respect to the sort of speed versus quality debate is hiring quality should never be sacrificed for speed. Like, yeah, sure, when you're building a hiring plan and you have like a forecast of what you want to, what teams you want to build and when, and like, back to the A-Cloud Guru days, we had like a full year forecast of like what we were going to hire, the teams that we were going to spin up. It was very, very organized. Obviously, it would change and pivot as we went through the year, but like we had a decent, number of kind of hires we were going to make, a decent idea at least of that sort of thing. And we had dates against those hires, like based on when we could afford to make those investments, based on like revenue and whatnot. But I don't think we ever got to the point where we felt like we were rushed. There's a few things we were able to do as like a talent team that I think sort of keep you from treading that balance too finely between like needing to hire the person and almost sacrificing hiring the right person for the sake of hiring someone, is like just giving yourself enough time and understanding like what the time to hire, average, whatever data you have is fine. Like, as long as you have some idea of roughly how long that's going to take and what notice period the candidate might roughly give, like 4 weeks, then you just need to make sure that you're in a position to plan to start that role early enough to get close enough to that target date, plus minus a few weeks.
Yeah.
Cool problem, no harm done, but you still feel like you're hiring the best person. You have time to source, you have time to go through like referral channels, and you're not just speeding towards this date where you're trading off all the quality stuff in favor of a deadline.
Yeah. And that makes total sense. And I guess when you do the classical thing of reverse engineering timelines.
Yeah, exactly.
So, we want this person landing on August the 1st. Okay, so 4-week notice period probably because this person's probably working. Right, now you're July the 1st, and then you're 3-4 weeks to get through an interview process, and now you're June the 1st. You depending on your team, your availability. So when you're doing that kind of basic planning, and obviously trying to the business, in my experience, wants you to bake in best case scenario. You're trying to go more realistic case scenario,
Yeah.
and and then so you're doing that, and then in your experience, communicating that way of thinking, is that with founders particularly, is that sort of met with surprise? When
Yeah,
you,
I think generally people in businesses that haven't been exposed to like the mechanics of recruiting before. So that could be founders, it could be first time hiring managers, and I've worked with a few of those types of people that that kind of get the interviewing piece and the know what they look for and all that stuff, but don't really understand like the operational side of recruiting. Like it's a surprise to them to hear that it's you have to kick off a position and start talking about something the best part of 3 months ahead of time. Like if you think of like the average, I don't exactly know what current stats are, but I'm willing to bet the average time to hire for a software engineer these days is probably somewhere in the region of anywhere between probably 40 to 60 days plus notice period, right? So you're talking about um, 6 to 8 weeks, and then plus a 4 week notice period. So you're really talking about having to start a conversation about that role, and really have a meaningful discussion about kicking it off with all your interviewers and that kind of thing, 2.5 to 3 months ahead of time. And most people don't think of it like that. It's kind of like it's surprising sometimes when you have those conversations. Even for me, I'm sort of I guess semi used to thinking this way now, but it's you catch yourself into like thinking about roles a little bit too late sometimes, and you sort of talk about roles like we had a discussion the other day at Equal, talking about the open roles as roles to be kicked off, but then we're talking about other roles that are going to come up later in the year, and you start to think like, are they roles that we need to talk about now, or how long can we leave it before we need to make those decisions? Like even it's I guess what I'm saying is it's like a process. It's something that you have to do fairly regularly, and you have to keep repeating those conversations, even if it's to solidify your own understanding. um, yeah, I'm just trying to
cool.
think, like, is there anything else?
Yeah, I mean, just picking up on you mentioned with ACG, a Cloud Guru, that you sort of had this 4 year plan mapped out. And I'm guessing that was based
Mhm.
on this is what we expect our revenue or user base
Yep.
to look like. That means X amount of funds are available, which means we can then afford to scale up these teams because they fit in then with our
Yeah,
strategic
it
plan.
was like business strategy, like we're going to make these plays, therefore we're going to need these teams in these positions to build X and Y features, um, and we expect revenue to do this, up hopefully, and so we can afford to do, you know, these things, but maybe at the cost of other things that the departments had submitted to. So it's like a trade-off process. But yeah, we had a good idea of we had like a rough idea of what we were walking into on a year by year basis. But it would always the details would change, but like the number of heads was often fairly accurate.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
One thing recruiters like generally is a bit of clarity and a bit of certainty. Like this
yeah,
is what we're going to be doing. Um, I know sometimes or quite often in the startup world where when you're going through what we're going through now, sort of economic sort of uncertainty, things can change at short notice, or an
yeah,
acquisition happens. And when I was at Zendesk, we were hiring for a team, and lo and behold, that 3 months into hiring for a team, we've just bought a business that's complementing this team. So now your hiring scope is completely changed. So all the plans you had,
yeah. And
and
maybe you won't be hiring those roles anymore, right? Like, and
Hmm.
you've got to you got to have some hard discussions
Yeah,
sometimes. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
How does that sit with you? Are you someone who's like really comfortable with, hey, look, where we go is where we go?
Honestly, I just think that like in a role like ours, you kind of you're entitled to the way that you feel about decisions that get made at a macro level. But I can't say that I've ever really had any massive amount of input into those decisions. Like, sure, if we had, I've been through several kind of on a couple of occasions actually where we've had to like close roles for whatever reason, and we've had candidates in process, and it's not the best. It doesn't feel like the best thing to do, but as long as you handle those conversations with transparency and grace, like I think that most people would understand that businesses have to um, particularly startups, like pivot and change and go through kind of pretty defining moments on a very regular basis. Like, taking away for a second, like what's happening in the market at the moment specifically, it, it's definitely much more uncertain today. Um, but I remember back in like 2018, 2017, 18, 19, like those decisions would still happen. They'd just be for different reasons, you know? Um, so yeah, like I said, as long as, those things are not like, it's not an amazing thing to have to do, like to close roles and communicate with a bunch of candidates that are midway through an interview process that, sorry, we have to put this on hold for a bit. But yeah, as long as you handle that with respect and transparency, I think that's most people would understand. And certainly, like, I know I accept what I can and can't control.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Talk to me a little bit about early days of a cloud guru, um, relatively sort of unknown in the market, but then started getting a bit of press and raise some money, and then they're in the media. Did that
Mm.
did that impact you? Did you see a marked uplift in your ability to attract people that previously you might not have been able to, or were things pretty
I
consistent?
think, yeah, this is an interesting one. Like, I joined at about employee number 65, 60, 70, something like that, mid 60s, I think. So I was post Series A, I think, pretty sure, but before Series B by to the tune of about 6 months, I think. And Series B was where, like, I mean, look, our Series B was probably smaller than most people's Series A's these days because the nature of VC funding is just, so much bigger now. But kind of feels like ACG was one of like the OG startups, but it kind of wasn't. It just felt like it. Anyway, um, yeah. It was an interesting time. Like, and how well known we were sort of depended on who you talked to. So we were a product. ACG is a product fundamentally to help teach technical and non-technical people how to cloud. Um, so if I was talking to a software engineer about a job who hadn't heard of us, or maybe was familiar with us, like there was a pretty good chance that they'd come across our product at some point. They may not affiliate it with the name, but they'd used it somewhere, and on further discovery, they were like, "Oh yeah, that's the guys I did a course with or whatever a couple of years ago on." Can't remember what that platform's called now, but yeah, on that platform. Um, so yeah, it's kind of funny. Like, whereas in the US with our hiring for go-to-market teams, I think we definitely had much more of an uphill battle until we started to make kind of bigger waves and started to become a bigger employer in Austin. Um, so yeah, I guess in summary, like I never found it hard to attract people to the ACG mission because I was doing a lot of engineering and product hiring, and for the most part, the engineers I was speaking to, had heard of us in some way, shape, or form because the product kind of related to them in some way. Um, but I think in the US they struggled a bit more because there wasn't that kind of natural connection, and the PR and the press and the talent brand stuff definitely sort of amped up after, just sort of amplified over time. Yeah.
Cool. And yeah, I can imagine engineers and product people to a degree as well being really interested in what ACG were doing because it was
Mm.
technology essentially. Um, which kind of leads me on to another thing. Quite often, founders are hell bent on a mission, like it's their life's mission to do this thing. And I've worked with startups in the past where founders, will sometimes come out of an interview and say something along the lines of he, she, that candidate, they didn't seem like they were really into what we were doing. I want people who are passionate about, making widgets for whatever it is. And my response would be, well, some people just want a job, and
Yeah.
no one's, firstly, no one's going to care probably as much as you because it's your business. But secondly,
Mm.
some people just want a job in a nice environment, working with good people with the latest tech, solving interesting challenges.
Yeah.
What's your experience of sort of the founder's mission sort of thing?
I'm all for it, right? Like I like people who take a bet, put the house on the line or whatever, and quit the cushy corp job wherever they are, like, and convince a bunch of people to give them millions of dollars and do a thing. Like that's great. But I think there's sometimes is the expectation that people are as excited as they are, and like you say, like I think some people are, and that's fine. Like I just think that it's probably unfair to rule candidates out on the basis they're not. Like you say, some people do want a job and they do want a stable, or like they're attracted for different reasons. It's probably not fair to say stable. Like it's if your principal concern was stability, then you'd probably join a larger company, right? But um, I think some people are attracted to the broad kind of uh, attributes of a startup that they think they might get access to. Like generally speaking, when you're working in a startup, as anyone, you just don't have the same silos that you do in a big company. You can impact and do. I know impact's like a bit of a buzzword, but like you can do so much more than just your kind of lane, if you like. Um, you can see a problem and solve it in like a kind of a scrappy way. There's not really like many formal processes, and you can help create those things based on what you think the best solutions are, as long as we're happy to you know scrunch it all up and throw it in the bin 3 months later when you've outgrown it. That's cool, I guess. But you can do those things. You can get involved with a broad range of challenges that transcend like a single discipline or role. And some people just want to do that thing. Like they're not fussed necessarily whether the product is healthcare or fintech or whatever. They may not have any personal affiliation to the domain or the product at all, and that I think that's okay. Like I don't have any. I don't. Certainly I don't think I do. I don't think I have any biases against people that don't. And yeah, I don't think it's a prerequisite. Basically, I think it to some extent like it kind of that problem sort of starts to go away over time as well. Like in the early days, I don't know. I'm just going to throw a number here, but like sub 100 people maybe, depending on the business. Like that conversation seems to come up way more. But once you get to a point where you've got built out teams and established leaders, and you've got not everyone reporting to the founders, you've got like some levels of leadership, those things just don't get talked about very much anymore. Like you just don't, you kind of accept the fact that you're probably not a startup anymore, and you're kind of becoming a semi-mature business, or like a teenage business, as we used to call it. And those same things just are not as, they just sort of phase out, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, I think startups, high appetite for risk, like try it. High autonomy, low on process, low on policy. Like
Mm.
we're just got to get to this place as quickly as possible. I think
Yeah.
it's an environment that probably works really, really well for some people. Others would find it terrifying.
Mm.
And again, I think one of the things that Mitch in the previous episode was talking about was being really clear on how you sort of qualify the current state. Like, you might join, an engineering team, and there's very little documentation around X, Y, Z. That'll come down the trap because right now we're just focused on, pushing this to production or hitting
Yeah.
these guide
Yeah. Yeah.
in these sprint deadlines.
I think there is something to
Um,
be said for, like, I mean, maybe we're going to cover this, but I think there is something to be said for like making sure that employees or candidates, I should say, are at least in some way aligned to values. Like that's kind of one way that you can circumvent they're not passionate about the problem space kind of conversation. Is they're passionate, they sort of show some level of behavior or demonstrate some level of behavior that aligns to your company values. As long as you've got some of that, like at ACG, for example, one of our values was learn all the things, because we were a learning company. It was important for us to hire people that had some level of I guess some level of like care about learning.
yeah,
And it didn't have to be professional. It could be like just how they kind of apply like a learning mindset to their life, in anything really. And we'd ask about that stuff, and that would demonstrate to us like, do we think that person meets that value or not? Like often, if you focus on the values rather than the product, I think that you achieve often you achieve a similar result. Like you just can attract, you can um, opt in like way more people.
Yeah, yeah, and it's an interesting segue into values. I think this whole thing around signal and noise in interviews, right? Being really aware and cognizant of the signals that you're looking for,
Mm.
and not getting dissuaded by the noise. The amount of younger recruiters, and I mean younger in terms of the amount of time they've been recruiting for. I've seen in the past who've been wowed by big brands. Yeah, this person used to work at Microsoft, therefore they must be really good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it might be relevant, but the fact that they've worked at Microsoft is neither here nor there. How does the fact they've worked at Microsoft relate to the requirements of the role?
Mm-hmm.
So, is this just noise or is it an actual signal? If you're
Yeah,
hiring an SRE type role, and this person's been an SRE at Microsoft, and the scale they've worked out has been ridiculous, yes, that probably makes sense. If they've been product support and they're wanting to move into SRE, the fact they've worked at Microsoft probably has no bearing on their ability to be an SRE. So again, signal and noise. So is that something that you've had to work with in your sort of three startup businesses with hiring managers around understanding the things that we're looking for, getting agreement from them around? We all agree these are the skills, competencies, and values that we're looking for in this role, and we're all playing our part in the interviewing team to gather all this data to make the best decisions possible.
yeah, yeah. There's a few things in this. This is a big topic to unpack. I think one thing that helps teams to do this effectively is having a kickoff of some kind, like having some documented conversation where you're able to. And this is going to sound really basic to like a vast majority of the audience, but it's amazing. Like when things are fast and you're hiring like heaps of roles, it's amazing how quickly this gets thrown out, and people are just like, oh yeah, we don't need to do that. We've already done this one, or like, we haven't got time, or whatever excuse, right? Like I'm guilty of that myself in on a few occasions, obviously, but like um, having a good kickoff is really key. Like making sure that all of the stakeholders who are going to be involved in the hiring decision in some way, shape, or form are across the key things that we're assessing. So the key skills, the key pillars of what we're looking for, and how we're going to ask questions about them. Those things. I think good interview preparation is really important for stakeholders, particularly like newer interviewers that maybe haven't interviewed before. It's one thing that maybe someone could be like a manager or a director of something, and they've never interviewed at your company before because they're 2 months into their role, and they might have a bunch of practices from their previous company that may not align to the way you want to interview. And so it's worth having a conversation to make sure people are prepared and understand how you assess talent at whatever company. But yeah, the signals versus noise thing is kind of funny. Like I just try and encourage hiring managers to through that kind of kickoff to make sure that they are focused on the skills and experience that they're trying to assess, and values if applicable too. Like I think where you get into the where they've worked kind of thing, that can certainly like rear some pretty ugly biases sometimes. Like there are some biases that people might have about companies that are inherently negative. Uh, Consulting companies get brought up a lot into that conversation, like big body shops. Oh, you can't hire someone from a body shop because they only care about X or Y. Like, but there are some really good people sometimes at those places, and you can't rule them out. Like if they've got the skills and the mentality and the attitude, like there are some gems in those orgs too. Um, so you've got to be mindful of biases. I think one way to kind of keep everyone on track is translating that kind of kickoff into some sort of a scorecard, which you then run through your ATS, summarized as much as possible into like the key pillars, and then you can break it down into in a Google Doc or whatever afterwards. That's something that I've done in every role now. Like I can't live without a scorecard for a role. Like it's just key. I feel like, because then you're sort of forcing your hiring managers and interviewers into making sure they focus and tick off things versus have an unstructured conversation that just goes completely off piste.
Mm. Yeah, it's
But yeah,
interesting.
we could talk about this for like half an hour.
Okay, well, let's do that. Interesting, you mentioned the other thing about consulting firms. It never ceases to amaze me our ability to classify a whole group of people who've worked at a company based on one or two interactions with
Yeah, like, oh
years
my
ago.
god, they were. I mean, insert tech company here. Like, they worked at, I don't know. Let's pick on Up Bank. Up, they're all amazing. I'm sure they are. I'm sure they're all amazing. But you can't use the company name necessarily to classify whether someone is a good hire for your company or not. Like, you still have to apply the lens. You can get excited when they apply. I do too. Like, I'm like, oh, they noticed us, they applied. That's amazing. Like, I'm
Yeah,
going to definitely have a conversation with this person if they have the skills that we're looking for. You know, it's an if, and those. I don't know, maybe this is. I don't know whether this is controversial or not. So maybe let's like cut this part out if it's too much. But what you tend to find is that vast majority of time, the stereotype is generally true. Generally speaking, like if someone has assembled a company and taken great care over the people they've hired, they probably all are very good. It doesn't necessarily mean whether they're good for your company, but they're not. They would be they would be good people to talk to, and you'd probably find like a certain level of like um, quality of answers and detail and broad experience, maybe similar to what that you're looking for. But that doesn't mean that you should necessarily assume that that's going to be true. More often than not is the case, and it's easy to assume, but it's the kind of negating the assumption part that's important.
yeah. This thing of this person applied and they're from insert company name, and we've heard that, and we know that insert company name have a great engineering capability. Therefore, this person is going to be great for us because they've got
It's
great
like,
engineers.
yeah, it's like changing that to like, we think they might be. Let's find out. Like it's like, let's apply the same criteria. Let's ask the same questions as we did to the person who applied from insert big archaic organization over here that also genuinely had the skills. Like, let's just ask the same questions and put people on the playing field. Like if person from tech company is the better candidate, great, but they got there on their own merit.
Yeah, yeah. In that's an interesting comment as well. It's a conversation that I don't know. I seem to have had sort of like since day one of Crew up until like last week, and I don't think it'll ever stop. The importance of interviewing candidates for the same role,
Mm.
to the same standards, same level, same range of questioning to understand them. If you're not doing that, what are the dangers?
Yeah, yeah, we had a bunch of this. I've experienced this a bunch of times. Um, we had some pretty like we had some pretty good principles at ACG that we developed over years, and I'd say we're doing the same thing at Equal, but we are. I like we're a lot earlier, so we'll get there in time. Like we have really good foundations on that stuff already, but we haven't done any like formalized training yet, which will come in the months ahead. Um, but at ACG we did this. We had these pretty well developed kind of hiring principles where we said like we hire people against the needs of the role, not against each other. Like, sure, if you've got two candidates at the end of the process, right, two people that you could offer the role and be happy with, yeah, it does become a conversation where you have to say which one do we pick and why, and it should be about which one we feel meets the needs of the role the most. Right, like you're kind of getting into the territory of splitting hairs there, obviously, but if you're assessing, there's a few things that you benefit from, I think, by having planned interviews that assess the same things and effectively put your candidates on a level playing field. Is number one is like time. So, like back in my agency days, I sort of found that there was so many situations where clients would say that person is amazing, but I just want to see one other candidate to make sure that I'm making the right decision. It's like,
Yeah,
why? If you know the role and you know that candidate meets the criteria of the role, you should just pull the trigger. You should just make an offer. That could be, you could get lucky. That could be the first candidate you interview. And there's often this like sense of discomfort with like, oh, but it's the first person I've met. Like, I don't know if I should be hiring the first person I met. Understand that. But if you've defined the role and you know what you need and that person ticks all your boxes,
Yeah.
why wait? Like,
Yeah.
I think this happened a lot with the market. We're not there now, obviously. Like, but if you wind the clock back a year or a year and a half, even, like, I think everyone would remember that things were batshit crazy. That time to hire was like some companies were doing interview processes in a week to be competitive. Those kinds of practices are extreme versions of what I'm saying. It's like you should be in a position at all times, if you've defined your role, to, in theory, hire the first person you meet, if that person meets all of your criteria and you feel like it's a good fit for your company. Um, yeah. So
one of the constant conversations we have is around, one, we like to be really prepared, and we like to be well planned, but spending the time at the beginning of the hiring process saves you all the time, drama,
yeah,
uncertainty at the other end when it matters most.
yeah,
Because when you're in these sort of competitive environments where, let's face it, people, even the market we're in now, people who are good and are out active in the market, they're probably interviewing at 3 or 4 places. So your ability to take your time and pick and choose between, two of the best people is
mm,
probably really diminished. You're probably rarely going to be in that situation. But if you spent the time, I think what you're getting is, if you spend the time at the front defining what good looks like, getting
yeah,
alignment with all your hiring teams, them all agreeing on, yes, these are the signals we're looking for, and they can debrief together really well and go, yes, this is our person. You should be
yeah,
able to just move, whether that's the first person you've interviewed or the 65th. It should be
yeah.
65th, but a
Yeah.
lot.
If you've got things right, it should not be the 65th.
Yeah, yeah,
But yeah, you might get there. Like, I think if you're getting to that point, obviously you want to be having a little check in and saying, "We're doing the right thing here." But yeah, you should be in a position where you can offer somebody pretty quickly if you need to. Like, you should be pretty confident, at least sort of 80 to 90% what that looks like.
yeah,
Um, I think like a sign of a need for another conversation with a hiring manager is where you have those moments where they say, "Yeah, I mean, look, yes, but no, yes, but maybe." And you just go, "Oh man, like I think we need to chat because yeah, is this the right time to hire this role? Are you unsure about anything? Is there anything we haven't discussed? Do we miss something in the kickoff? Has something changed? Like genuinely, like throughout this process, has something changed? Have you learned? Like often, what happens is a hiring manager knows 60 to 70% of what they need, but it's not until they start speaking to candidates that they go, "Oh yeah, actually, I need someone who can do this." And this meeting this person and having them answer these questions this way really validated that for me. And then that takes your search and takes your funnel in a slightly different direction, and you have to adjust course very slightly, but it can happen. It can happen. It's just you've got to be a partner to the hiring manager and not just not an order taker in that
yeah,
sense. Like you've got to
yeah,
be able to sort of like raise your hand when you feel like something is slightly off and call it out. Like you gain a lot of partnership status and respect that way as well.
agreed. The lines the lines that you dread as a recruiter. I'm not going to hire just the first person I interview. No, like, I want to see a few people. Well,
Mm,
if that first person you interview is right for the role based on all the criteria we've discussed, and the hiring team will agree, then I'm going to be pushing you a little bit on that. And the other one is, I just want to see another candidate so I can compare. Again, another conversation we frequently have is not comparing candidates to each other, but to the requirements of the role.
yeah, that was something we were really strong on at ACG, man. We were really strong on that stuff. It was like if we know the role, we hire against the role, and we don't say maybe. Like people are either a yes or a no. Like you can't. It's really hard to hold people in these kind of like limbo stages. Like sometimes there's like you know, you get to the end of the interview process and you've said yes to somebody, and then someone pops up at the earlier part of the funnel and they look really promising, and you've got to do your best to sort of juggle timeframes. And there are certain situations like that, but broadly, those are real outliers. And as much as possible, minimizing like, yeah, well, maybe let's just keep them here for a bit kind of decision. Like you want to kind of try and trim that back as much as possible and try and stamp that out, I think.
Yeah. I think for any founders or people who might not do TA/recruiting day to day that might be listening or watching, I think what they might pick up from this is that there's this general perception, I think, that recruitment is sort of seen as this admin function, um, where really it should be this enabler of helping teams get to where they need to be, which in turn then helps the broader business. So this real sort of driver, if you like,
Mm.
of quality. What's been your perception of the way that recruitment is looked at the various businesses that you've worked at most recently?
Hmm. Interesting one. I have never, honestly, hand on heart, I've never. I mean, look, in my agency days, it was slightly different because I mean, look, unless you're, years in seat, like you don't really get the chance to feel like as much of a partner that you do when you join a company and work there for years. Like you do get to that point with some clients, right? But it takes a lot. It takes a very long time. Um, but hand on heart, like I don't think I've been ever felt like an admin function at any of the companies I've worked at. To be honest, I think all the founders and all the senior leaders and all the people I've worked with and for have had a great deal of respect for the function. Maybe I've been lucky. I'm not sure, honestly. Um, but yeah, I like I've never felt like that, to be honest.
Yeah. So
Um,
an appreciation and a respect for what's needed in the role, and appreciation, and I'm guessing respect
Importance as
for.
well, like the importance of the importance of the enabling function. Like I think there are some times where like if you join a company that's really small, like you might find that founders have done their own recruiting for a while, and often they're absolutely ready to just see the end of it, and hand the baton over to somebody who can take it on. And it doesn't take long before if you're doing well and all that kind of stuff, and you're a partner to the stakeholders in the business and communicative and all the things that you should be in the function. Like it's not long before you're getting some pretty good praise. Like I think most. I would like to think that most modern startups have a real appreciation for the TA function. I think you only have to look at like the US market in recruiting and how early you have to capture talent there to be anywhere close to competitive, to understand like how valuable it is to have people out there building relationships with candidates on a day-to-day basis.
Mm. Um, Slight segue and a slight change of focus. All the noise that ChatGPT is getting at the moment.
Yeah,
I I've always had this thing, right, of you should absolutely be automating what you can,
yeah,
the highly repetitive linear work, but then rehumanizing, if you like, the parts that you should absolutely be humanizing. So more
yeah.
face time with candidates, more face time with your hiring managers. Um, Staying on the topic of tools for a second, anything at the moment you're particularly enjoying? Anything you've tried recently that's either from a productivity perspective or from a tech perspective that's you're enjoying, that's paying dividends?
At the moment, not as much. We're just transitioning from at the moment we're transitioning from lever to greenhouse. Uh, there are definitely people in different camps with ATS systems. Um, even just the ability for like an ATS to for candidates to self book, easy book links in Lever or Calendly integrations in Greenhouse, good enough for me. I'm not particularly fussy when it comes to automating giant parts of the process, but I would say this: like using things like ChatGPT for like just writing the bare bones of a JD
Yeah,
is unbelievable.
yeah,
Like you just say, you can type in like, write me a software engineer JD, 3 years experience or something. You can use whatever, React, blah 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 blah. You can chuck in a bunch of technologies, and it will spit out something that looks pretty damn close to a good JD. And you can just you can take, if you're like thinking, oh, I got to write this whole thing and I don't even know where to start. ChatGPT, chuck in a bunch of stuff, see what it comes out with, and then just use that. That will probably save you half an hour, and you just change what it wrote. And then I've heard of tools like I've in previous orgs, like we've considered investing in tools like GoodTime, for just a slightly more enhanced. It's like a sort of a better scheduling tool. It's like candidate self-scheduling for hiring manager interviews and that kind of thing. It's a bit more sort of an automated, personalized experience. I'm a bit old school though, frankly. Like I really like having some sort of personal touch, to my own detriment sometimes. Like it's a lot of calls, but like once someone makes it past hiring manager interview, I like to phone them and give them feedback. And I hate automating too much to the detriment of candidate experience. Like I really like having that touch point and explaining and giving feedback, and giving someone a 5-minute call to explain why we're not taking them forward. I think is key for early startups building brand. People remember that stuff. It's amazing, and they'll always champion you in market as well. I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's real opportunity there for, particularly if your numbers aren't your requisition numbers aren't monstrous. Your opportunity to be having really good conversations, whether it's, as you say, you're rejecting people for now, or you're moving people forward. Your ability to humanize that and get referrals, get reapplying for different roles as they come in.
Even just doing sourcing, like even just allowing yourself time to do tasks that need a little bit of oversight. Sure, there are definitely automation tools out there, and I'm sure they are going to come a long way. But I still feel like as of right now, I still think sourcing is probably better done by somebody rather than something. If you've had the conversation with your hiring manager about the needs of the role and the type of person you want to hire, you're the person in that call or in that conversation calling out when a hiring manager is being unrealistic because we just can't find X or Y things in market. You're the person that then goes to the sourcing platform of your choice, puts those criteria in, tries to find somebody, and can have that back and forth. Like I think automating things that are highly human are tough, and should never come at the cost of like things that are experience based or just require a really deep understanding of some nuanced thing.
Yeah,
basically.
ChatGPT is not bad at writing search strings either. If you're a Boolean,
it can do a lot of stuff for you. If you're like, what is Boolean? Like me, I don't use Boolean ever. I just use LinkedIn's. I just use the search breakdown and just say yes and no to a bunch of stuff. And my general rule, if anyone cares, is on LinkedIn is to have somewhere between 250 to 500 candidates in the. I know it's arbitrary, but like I'd like to have that number. So it means I filtered the list from thousands down to something relatively reasonable, where I'll get to the end of the list, and then I can do like that's my first hard search. And then if I exhaust my hard search and I need to expand it a bit, that's where I start having trade-off conversations with the hiring manager, saying, "Look, I couldn't find enough people to respond with all of these things that you wanted. Like, let's start thinking about what we're going to trade off. Like, what skills are you willing to teach? What skills are you willing to remove from the search terms to allow us, to capture a larger audience?" And then you can start pulling those terms out of a LinkedIn search or a thing, and you get that expansion of the volume, the list.
Yeah. ChatGPT, just going back to that one, good for templating as well. Templates for your PDs, your job ads, hiring guides if you need those, these interview guides, like great for building all those things out. Give me a list of these things. Oh, can you put it in a table as well? And it'll chuck it in a table.
Yeah, write it in a poem. And it'll probably do that for you if you want to drop some. If you want to do like, if you want to do some entertaining social media posts.
Yeah.
Like your previous host, often in your previous episode. Like I know Mitch is a big fan of that stuff. Like I'm sure that ChatGPT could write you a bunch of stuff that if you're like me, like I don't really post that much, and I'm often like, oh no, I don't know what to say. Like I I might just start using ChatGPT to make my make my posts, however infrequent they are, like a little bit more engaging than I would write myself.
Right in the style of Mitch King. Yeah,
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 he knows. ChatGPT knows Mitch, I'm
yeah.
sure.
Everyone knows Mitch. Um, so we covered a lot of ground in 45 minutes or so. I think sort of key takeaways. I think then are this this need to set things up really well at the beginning for your hiring teams.
Yeah,
This collaboration and agreement on what we're looking for, how we know we're going to know when we see it, how we're going to qualify it,
yeah.
how we're going to qualify that through the interview process, which really is just data gathering, right? This is us information gathering through a series of conversations.
Mm.
And then how we're all going to agree on, yes, this is the person we're going to go with. So
I
again, I
think
think,
one other thing I'd just add to the like assessment piece of that, right? Like the I don't know the questions is like, and maybe you've covered this before, but I feel like I add it anyway. Is um, really encourage your interviewers to try and build questions. Again, they can use ChatGPT. You can provide templates, but use questions that try to elicit the candidate to provide examples. Start there. If they haven't done the thing, like if they haven't got an example, basically, how would they approach it is fine too. But always try to start with examples first. So like, tell me a story when you did X and Y, or tell me a story when you saw a need to do this thing, but you had to maybe there was a pivot or a challenge. Like, how did you address that? Like you want to kind of hear from the candidate like specific snippets of their experience that help convince you as an interviewer whether they have a skill or not. And I think where hiring managers, where some probably some recruiters sort of struggle is where hiring managers are like asking arbitrary questions like, "What's your 5-year plan?" or "Where do you see yourself in X years?" Or they're the same thing, but like what I mean. Those traditional kind of questions that still are used today. Um, uh, I think it's just good to kind of untrain those habits pretty fast and provide like some insight into why, and then um, help bring hiring managers that are maybe newer to that school of thought along for the ride. Yeah,
yeah, agreed. And the phrase we use with all the hiring managers is open and probe. So open the conversation, open the
yeah,
question. Yeah, talk to me about a time where you've had to make a critical decision on this. They give you an example. What would have happened if you'd gone the other way? What when you were making that decision? What were your considerations? What things were you thinking about?
yeah,
Yeah, so you're really then probing into the mindset of of the thinking around that problem. What would you do differently next time? What would you have needed to see to make you choose the other path? We would have needed better infrastructure, which would have taken time, and we didn't have an infrastructure team, so you know, we had to make do the best we could. That's logical. So open and
yeah.
plug. We like this terminology. Yeah, beautiful.
I
Um,
agree.
Startup hiring recommend to recruiters who are going into their first internal role or not?
Oh, I think so. Yeah, I mean, it always depends on the company and the people you work with. I think that's going to have startup or no startup. That's going to have the biggest bearing on your experience, I reckon. Um, but I think if you want to get exposure to a broad range of challenges quickly, it can be a big accelerant for your career. Absolutely. You have to have a certain. I think there is some things that help though. You have to have some level of comfort in chaos. You have to be able to kind of accept that things are going to change and things are going to change often. Um, Things are going to be, uncomfortable while you grow. Like it might not be perfect. You might not have policies for everything, but that's just part of it. Um, I think it takes a certain type of person that actually doesn't mind. I wouldn't say thrive, but like doesn't mind the uncertainty is enough. Um,
Yeah, we
and
often
then
talk about
it's easy to get bitten by the bug, man. Like it's really easy. Once you've done it, it's like, oh, can't really see myself not. It's
yeah,
not for everyone, obviously,
yeah,
but like for me
yeah,
personally, it's like I just kind of like it. I kind of like the unstructured nature of it, and
Mm-hmm.
the we can do things a bit better than this kind of nature
Yeah.
of it. And I've always been a bit that way geared. So like
Right.
it's good for me personally, but like
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I think there's that thing of being being comfortable, not always chasing perfection. We want to get perfect at doing this, and this. Like
Yeah.
you're never going to get there.
It's
Those sorts.
progress at the cost of perfection. Like you optimize progress versus perfection. Like we used to, we this was like Sam Kronenberg's getting a plug here now, but he used to say this a lot. He used to say that he co-founder and CEO of ACG before. Um, he used to say progress over perfection a lot. Like he used to talk about like moments in the company where we had to, you know, to focus on progress versus perfection. Do something versus chasing like this perfect iteration of what you're trying to build. And it applies to internal operating policies and internal roles as well as product decisions. Um, you know, you will really, if a startup goes well, like you will outgrow the policies that you've created a year ago anyway. So why worry about something that's perfect? Just do the thing that makes sense for you based on the data you have. And then if you have to change it in 6 to 12 months, cool. That's the nature of it.
Yeah, this that thing, right, where there's no other way to go but forward. Like the minute you start treading water, trying to perfect things, you're just losing time. And particularly in super competitive markets where you're trying to get first mover advantage, or you're trying
Yeah.
to do your things out quickly. So I get it.
I think the other thing as well is you can learn from something you've done as opposed to it's probably hard. I mean, I don't know for sure, but like it's probably harder to learn from something that you haven't done because you don't get the feedback. Like, so if you do something and people are like, nah, not the right thing, you can at least you can learn from that. At least that's something you can take, and you should shouldn't worry about like what if we do the wrong thing. It's like if we do the wrong thing, that's just kind of part of the game. Like you learn from it, you move on, you build something better next time. That could be an internal people policy or process. It could be a product decision. It could be anything. Um,
And for the
yeah,
most
I
part,
just
you're
think
not
like
making life or death decisions, right?
just doing something. Yeah, yeah. I think there's another quote I've heard is like, "Is this a one-way door or a two-way door? Like, if we do this, is there no coming back from this? Which is your one-way door, which is where you probably want to have, a little bit more of a stop and pause kind of moment before you do something, um, or a two-way door where the thing that you do is easily, you can press Control Z basically and just undo it completely. In which case, like, don't stress about those ones. Just don't stress. Like, they're not realistically like they might feel like big decisions, but that's easily changeable.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much. I'm mindful of time. This has been great, and I'm hoping that anyone who's listened has picked up a few things that if they're thinking of getting into recruiting startups, or if they're in startups now and they're going through this, oh my god, I'm not sure what I should be doing. Just keep going. So I think there's been a lot of good stuff out of this. Mate, thank you again.
No, mate. Thank you. Like it's, I didn't think I'd be on a podcast at any point in my life, so this is certainly new ground for me. But I hope it's valuable. Honestly, I do. Yeah.
Nice. Probably going to be the first of many now. You're going to end up getting loads of offers. Just remember me when
Oh,
you're famous.
yeah. We'll see. I'll just stay in my little cave.
Thank you again, my friend. I really appreciate it.
Cheers, man. See ya.